Hey everyone, this is smpratte, and today we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of third-party grading. I actually didn't plan on making this video, but so many of you requested for me to touch on the new PSA policy and also just talk about the current climate of third-party grading. So let me preface all this by saying this is 100% my opinion, 100% my feelings and opinion on the topic. In general, I truly value what third-party grading has done for collectibles. It's established and legitimized all hobbies in a way that was simply impossible before its existence. Before, it was just the business and the buyer trying to work out, the price or condition, where with third-party grading, it eliminates that conflict of interest. However, I think that conflict of interest creeps in a bit with this new policy, which we'll get into. But let's start with the good. I really like how PSA and Pokemon have developed their relationship over the years. They're being acknowledged more, which is good. I like the interface of the website. I like how you're notified about your grades. I think that is great. I like how it's all streamlined now. All A+ improvements. Now, the bad, there's a lot to dissect here. Starting with increased turnaround times. This is a good segue because it straddles the fence. There's a reasonable side to the increased turnaround times. Naturally, everything is growing. We're always talking about growth. That's a reoccurring theme. Not only in Pokemon, but most hobbies are growing, so therefore, you're going to have more submissions. It's going to naturally increase the backlog. So that's the main reason why turnaround times increase. However, it's very difficult for a business or someone whose livelihood depends on getting those cards back and planning around that. It's very difficult. So that's why it straddles that fence of being bad. It's reasonable to an extent, but it still is bad at the end of the day because there is no just definitive answer. Especially when we look at something like Beckett. We're going hard here on PSA, but Beckett is just a nightmare. That non-guaranteed, you can go through a full-term pregnancy and your cards will still be at Beckett. So we're just going to focus mostly here on PSA because they're the majority of involvement with Pokemon. But within this aspect of increased turnaround times, there's something we can better on the consumer end. I'm going to start with what we can better on the consumer end, and then we'll get into what PSA can improve on. Pokemon submitters, by and large, need to submit their cards properly. And don't take this as an insult. Whatever I'm saying right now, I'm saying to myself. We need to not send in first edition base Charizards through bulk. That should never happen. In fact, that's the number one reason why they're doing this new policy. Is because too many people are sending in cards that were never worth $100 no matter what through the bulk service. I remember that crazy story on E4. Someone cracked out a first edition, I think it was a BGS 9.5 or 9 first edition base Charizard, sent it through PSA bulk at $1, friggin' $1. That card was never worth $1 since 1999. And I think they even claimed it was damaged by PSA or misgraded. And I hope PSA just said, here is your dollar, because that is just ridiculous. It shouldn't happen. More importantly, it clogs the drain for everybody. It slows down your order because if multiple people are doing this, not only does it slow down your order, it slows down everyone else's, which already has that natural backlog. So it just further clogs that drain. So that's what we could do better on our end as a consumer. Now let's get into what everybody wants to talk about, what PSA can improve on. So because of this whole too many Charizards going through bulk, too many big cards going through bulk, they implemented this new policy that basically retroactively charges you for what the grade receives, what your card receives. So, for example, if you send in a Charizard, it hits a 9, that's going to be $5,000, and they're going to hit you with that appropriate service level. What I don't like about this, there's a number of problems here. Number one, conflict of interest comes back. Conflict of interest is like, good. It returns from the depths that it was sealed down there with Gandorf in the realm. It returns from the darkness, from Shade City, because there's now an incentive to give that grade. Now, I'm not implying there's this massive grand conspiracy or that any grading company is doing anything insidious or nefarious, but at the end of the day, you don't want that. It's better for the third party to be simply a third party. You don't want this gatekeeping situation occurring. More importantly, I like how they had it before. I remember one time I sent in an illustrator. Back then, I think actually, the price they were quoting was the price of one that I sold. So they quoted at the time, I think it was the 54,000 sale. This is like 3 or 4 years ago. So they said, okay, it obviously is going to be a fraction of that. So you got to send it in at a low 5-figure valuation, which I was like, okay, that's fine. And more specifically, they're doing it before the grade. Afterwards, it's like this hostage negotiation where you're like trying to barter to get back your submission. That's just not how you want to do business in general. It should be before the grade happens. because that's what the customer is submitting. Now, this is where we get into the ugly a little bit. Ultimately, it's not the customer's job to grade the card. That anxiety shouldn't be put on the consumer. The person submitting the card, sure, at the end of the day, we know like what a Psyduck scream, I can look at this, we know generally what condition it's in. But a lot of cards sit between that 9 and 10 bracket. A lot of that 9 to 10 ratio is minuscule. And if we take something like Tiflosion 17, perfect example. That card will never sell over $100 ungraded. Ever. Ever. But if it hits a 10, that's a $5,000 card. So that difference between 9 and 10 is huge. And if it does happen to hit a 10, that shouldn't fall back on the consumer. Because at the end of the day, it's not their job to meticulously analyze if it'll be the 9 or 10 ratio, because it's very difficult to grade that card. So that's, PSA's decision at the end of the day. That's what you're paying for as a customer. And you appropriately paid for that. If the card is $100, fair market ungraded, that's what it's worth. Because fair market ungraded, potentially mint, is not certified mint. Those are two different things. And for the big cards, they are light years apart. They don't even live in the same time zone. They are so far away. More importantly, let's dig a little deeper into this. When you start getting into the higher end, let's go to the top of the mountain. I just listed a 2001 Tropical Wind on eBay that in PSA 9 condition. Literally no one else in the entire world owns that card. That was the only graded copy for 10 years. It's one of the rarest cards in existence, not just in Pokemon, one of the rarest cards of all hobbies. So therefore, I put it $500,000 because I'm just putting it out there. There's a number of reasons why it's listed. It's a priceless item. I'm not trying to tell you it's worth $500,000. I'm not trying to tell you it's worth $1 million. What I am telling you is there's no way you can ascertain fair market value for that item. I don't care if it's PSA 1. There will never be enough sales data for something like that to appropriately tack on a fair market valuation. Now, of course, it's not worth $100. Obviously, it's not worth $1,000. But when you start getting to $10,000 and beyond, there's no answer. So, therefore, if you're charging someone the maximum value for that, it's absurd at the end of the day. There's literally no way you can ascertain value. And more specifically, if I'm paying for a $100,000 valuation, are you going to get me that $100,000 customer if it's not a proven price point? So that's where it gets a bit murky. Now, to go back and bring some optimism in here, some realistic optimism, I haven't heard of any scenario like that where they've taken a card of that caliber and said, hey, you're going to be charged the highest walkthrough, whatever it is, Super Saiyan Express or whatever. I haven't heard that, but I have heard some that straddle the fence that make me worry that this policy is going to extend to that category. And if we come down the mountain a bit, if we talk about something like a Unicarb, Trophy Kangaskhan, I know these are still rare items, but the point remains, even within the same grade, there's such a variety in valuation. Because these cards are so hard to find, especially when you get in that higher grade range, because their sales are so infrequent, it's impossible to ascertain fair market value. And more specifically, PSA does not have an in-house expert. I'm not trying to throw shade here on PSA. They simply don't. They have, and my number one gripe with PSA can be summarized, and they need to stop hiring Billy and need to start paying more bills for an expert. They need to pay more bills for a true expert, because at the end of the day, market knowledge is the most valuable thing right now. And you can't train that. You can't train how to understand the market. You can train how to Google stuff. You can train how to go to Pokemon Price on E4 with the largest concentration of experts. I'm not trying to pump E4's tires here, but that's just the reality of it. But, that's the problem, is that you can't train this type of thing. It takes someone who already knows it. And, for example, like I can look at a card in real time, not only tell you its estimated value, but I can tell you, is it going to be a depreciating asset? Coming down further from the mountain, not only are the high-end things very ambiguous, come down to let's say Scream promos. Go to something like Scream promos. The natural trend for new cards, it's up, down, across. That's what happens. Comes out hot, settles a bit, and then probably hits an inflection point. That's the overall trend, up, down, and across. So therefore, if you're being charged on the peak value of a Scream, it's a depreciating asset. So it just shouldn't exist. And again, I'm not saying this is something PSA is going to do necessarily. I'm just throwing my concerns and my feelings out there for this new policy to try and, give a public critique so they can maybe, trim the fat and just get a better assessment on how Pokemon cards work, because Pokemon cards in general are still in this creating market, establishing market phase. You have a lot of cards, again, going back, pumping my tires again. I don't think there's a single individual who is more seasoned with trophy cards specifically than me. And I couldn't tell you what half of these cards are going to earn in the current market because they haven't sold in the current market. So it's really hard to say, yeah, this is what it's worth. I've had phone calls, I've gone to the PSA office to try and help them assess values for these high end cards because it's so ambiguous. So therefore, that retroactive charge shouldn't exist. It needs to be on what people are submitting, ungraded, fair market value for that card, ungraded. If it gets a 9 or a 10, yeah, I get it that, a 10 Charizard first edition base is a huge premium, but that's not what they submitted. If they're paying the fair market value for what they submitted, that's what it should be. And maybe the payout policy needs to change. And more importantly, the thing I want to end on here, the only reason why misgrades happen is because of misgrades. It's that simple. The only reason why misgrades occur and exist are because of misgrades. Again, that shouldn't fall on the customer. The customer shouldn't be the relief fund for PSA's miscalculation. And I am always the guy who would stand there on the front lines and say, mistakes happen, human error, absolutely, 100%. I'm always on the side of rationale and reason. But misgrades only occur because of misgrades. It's not because of the customer. That shouldn't fall on the customer. And you shouldn't retroactively charge the customer if a card hits a 10. Because again, if you're paying $5,000 max is what somebody would pay, even then that's speculative. I would say realistically $3,000, $5,000 for a assumed mint Charizard first edition base card. It would never be $40,000 ungraded. That would never occur. So that's my take on the whole PSA situation. Why you see the Poliwags as a carryover from the buyer's market. There are a lot of Poliwag flippers funneling in cards. What we can improve on for ourselves as a submitters is stop missubmitting cards. It's getting a little out of hand. I know there's a lot that sit there. Most Pokemon cards sit under $100, so I'm right there with you. But those ones that are selling over $100 all day ungraded, no, you just got to slow it down. Again, remember, just chill out. Instead of sending in 100 cards in one day, send them over a couple months. Everybody's happy. It stabilizes the market to end on a positive note. This will hopefully, if they work out the kinks with this policy, it'll stabilize the market, which I think is needed right now. There's a lot of manic flipping going on. So this will hopefully help stabilize the market, and more specifically, it'll help stabilize the turnaround times. It'll just be stabilization across the board if you get a nice, healthy pace going. Because right now, it's just like we're throwing all the cards through bulk as much as we could fit in a bulk order. And, if we just pace it out a little bit more, everybody wins. The consumer wins, PSA can improve, the market can stabilize. Stable's good, calm water is good. You like a nice, calm current. It's relaxing. So there you go, guys. That's what I have for third-party grading. Again, just to emphasize, this is my opinion. It's not some universal truth. This is my opinion on what's going on, my take on everything. Let me know what you think about it. Let me know how you feel. I'm sure PSA's ruined marriages. It's helped marriages. It's brought that spark back. It's frustrated people. But let me know where you stand. As usual, that's everything I have. Till next time.